Over on my podcast, the Gay Racing Podcast, we would call these the flops. So my flops of 2024, I think Daniel Suarez is going to do just as bad as he did this past year. I think he's probably going to get replaced by either Zane Smith or SVG in 2025, 2026. The performance just has not been there for me for Daniel Suarez. I don't think he'll make the playoffs. I think he has to make the playoffs to keep that ride. We'll see what happens there. This one's maybe a little bold, but I have Chase Elliott continuing his little slump that he's in after last year. I could see that going either way. I could see him just continuing to run. I mean, he started running better toward the end of the year, but just was not there last year. His mental space was just not right, it seemed, all year. Just wasn't driving like himself. I could see that continuing. I'm predicting that he will, but I could also see him, being back to form. We'll have to wait and see on that one. And this last one's kind of a joke, but, this kind of is his thing. Another NASCAR one, Denny Hamlin. Why? He called it, he already said that he's going to win the championship next year, or this year. It's over. It's already over. Denny Hamlin will not win the championship. Slump.
I'm going to say, and Matthew bringing up Brad Keselowski in the chat as well, I think RFK is pretty solidly of a number 2 team behind Penske at this point. I think they've overtaken Stewart-Haas Racing and maybe even Front Row Motorsports with Michael McDowell and how strong they ran last year. I think they might be even with Stewart-Haas. But I want you to think about Stewart-Haas's 4-car lineup here. And this is not, me coming up and knocking any of these guys individually. But I just want you to think of experience when you think of this lineup. You got Josh Berry. He's done a nice job subbing in for Hendrick here and there. He got a couple opportunities with Spire the last few years to run 1 or 2 races here or there. But he's going to be, a 33-year-old rookie, I guess? And he's older for a rookie. He's got a lot of racing experience, but not a lot of Cup experience. Noah Gragson obviously had his season ended prematurely last year. He doesn't have a ton of experience. He really struggled the Cup races that he got to do last year with Legacy Motor Club. How about one-time Cup Series winner Chase Briscoe? I know he had a lot of success and a lot of wins in the Xfinity Series, but it just has not been able to translate over to Cup nearly as well as I think we all anticipated it would. And then Ryan Preece as well. Again, I think one of the biggest surprises from last season was just how far off the pace he was, because I thought this was going to be his big break and his opportunity to really reestablish himself in the Cup Series and take that next step forward in his career, finally being in top equipment. I mean, I don't even know if we can call Stewart-Haas Racing top equipment anymore based on where they were last season. I mean, when you look past Kevin Harvick, that team was absolutely nowhere. Now Harvick's gone. Now that veteran experience that you had, that team leader that Kevin Harvick was, he's not going to be there in 2024. And it is, I hate to say it, but I think it's a very underwhelming 4-car lineup, certainly the most underwhelming of all the 4-car teams in the Cup Series. And again, not picking on any of these guys as individuals, but I think if you want to talk about an entire team being in a slump and continuing that slump in 2024, you have to look at Stewart-Haas Racing. I hope they go out there and prove me wrong. I hope they can sneak in a couple of wins here or there. I hope they can get the speed from Ford Performance to do it. But I can't say that I'm predicting that happening either.
And with Stewart-Haas Racing, they're doing this marketing campaign right now on social media where they're like, we've proved the haters and the doubters wrong before. And to me, it's silly. I get what they're doing, but it's like, you need to focus on the future, because your team is not in a good position right now. They lost Eric Almirola too, by the way. And I know he didn't win a lot, but he also brought in a ton of experience. And now this team, their leading driver is Chase Briscoe, who, like you said, Ben, only has 1 win, hasn't been around in Cup that long. Not good, and they're not in my slump because they've already been slumped. Like, I just don't see that changing at all. But I mean, I don't know, this marketing campaign to me, I just wanted to bring that up. It's just very bizarre, and I think it adds unnecessary pressure onto the team. Because it's like their marketing campaign is like, we are a team that performs. We've always defied the odds. We're always going against the haters. It's just like, okay, then prove it. You haven't proved that in 5 years, 4 years? Well, 2020, so 4 years ago. It's just like, okay, I'm waiting to see what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. And I think me and Ben, we talked about the SHR lineup at the back end of last year on Grid Tonight, and we were saying how disappointed we were with it, the way it was going to line up. And Alex, you kind of added to what we said. And I have to agree with you on Daniel Suarez. He's under massive pressure this year. He got that win at Sonoma last year, but other than that, was nowhere really, especially compared to his teammate. And now he's got the added pressure of Zane Smith and SVG looking in his rearview mirror for that seat for 25 or onwards. So I think Suarez is in struggle street to keep his ride. Here's one that might maybe surprise or is one that maybe come from left field. From MotoGP, Enea Bastianini on the factory red Ducati. Now, last year he had a terrible year in terms of injury. He's got to come back and be up there on pace with his double world champion teammate Pecco Bagnaia this season. Otherwise, he's going to have Jorge Martin or Marc Marquez trying to take his ride next year. So he definitely needs a big season. Probably should have added that in for my potentials for the last question, really, but here we are. And another one that's a potential flop and a continual flop is Sergio Perez. Just woeful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you there, Matt. That Perez started 2023 with such promise, and then sort of faded away as the season kind of went on. Unfortunately, as has been pointed out a few times by various people in this call, and not least Ben earlier. But in terms of my mind, I think Sam Bird had a very, very. He's had two very tricky years in Formula E. With Jaguar, of course. Season 8, where for the first time in many seasons he didn't win a race at all. And Season 9, where he got a few podiums. It was a better season, but it's more notable for him crashing into his teammate Mitch Evans in Hyderabad. And then later he did it again in Jakarta. So Sam Bird, he's moved to McLaren as a sort of last chance saloon. But I don't expect the McLaren to be as strong potentially as the factory Nissan team, especially the more that factory Nissan team gets settled in. But so Sam Bird, I think he's got a lot of staying power. Sam Bird, I think he's a great driver. The fans absolutely adore Sam Bird in London every year. Every year he seems to treat it like it's going to be his last year, and everyone says, "Don't go, Sam," and then he comes back. But that's not the case for all Formula E drivers, unfortunately. If you're a fan of certain drivers, of course, that have fallen by the wayside as the years have gone on. But yeah, so as much as I wish Sam Bird the best, I don't see this being fantastic. Yeah, I think Jake Hughes is going to be very, very strong alongside him in the sister McLaren as well. And then I think I go back to Formula One for my other pick. I'd probably go for, I think, Logan Sargent. I think there's a lot of pressure on Logan Sargent. There already was in the first season with Williams. He scored a point after I think it was the two disqualifications for Leclerc and Hamilton in Austin, wasn't it? And so he was able to sneak into the points through that. But other than that, he said his best races, unfortunately, were ones where Williams were very, very uncompetitive, sadly, and didn't quite finish in the points with either him or Albon. I don't think he's ever really looked within half a second or 3/10 of Albon. He never looked particularly closer than that at most races last season. And a couple of races where he did do very, very well in qualifying, like Zandvoort, I remember he kept bidding it in both the race and qualifying, admittedly under very, very tricky conditions. So I think, I feel bad about this because it's sort of like, who do you think is going to fail? And I sort of feel like, well, if I predict the driver's going to fail, it ends up sort of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy because it's sort of, you're predicting the worst, and you're more likely to fail than you are than to succeed in motorsport. But I think Logan Sargent has all the ingredients that he needs to succeed. I think when everything's working, he's a fantastic driver. But I think it's going to be very, very difficult to see the Williams being particularly any better than it was last season, although James Vowles has done a lot of great work as the team principal there at that team. So I think Logan Sargent will have a better season, but I don't think it's going to be quite good enough for him to keep that drive long term. But again, as we always say, I hope he proves me wrong. I hope Sam Bird proves me wrong, and I also hope Sergio Perez proves me wrong, because otherwise we're in for a very, very dull F1 season, especially.
F1, I'm thinking when it comes to flops, I'm sort of looking at Carlos Sainz. I'm thinking, okay, you got that win because of what happened at Singapore. Charles Leclerc, if he doesn't have the bad luck, I think he's going to outperform, do better than Sainz. And if Mercedes is stronger and Red Bull is going to be Red Bull, I think he's going to be the sixth place person, and I think he will be shut out. MotoGP, high flop, I think it's going to be Alex Marquez. I just think now this year, everybody knows what's capable of him in that bike. I think that's not going to go too great. He's going to get overshadowed by his brother. And he took Sam Bird from me because I was thinking, I don't see that going to work out. But if I had to look at NASCAR, I think Martin Truex Jr. is going to struggle. And I think he's going to at some point say, this is my last year. I think I'm done for.
I agree. This is Truex's last year. I will echo that. I don't know if he'll do bad, but I think this is his last year. He's been trying to go sailing out on a boat for like 4 years now, but Joe Gibbs won't let him go. So,
couple of comments in the chat room. I think Stewart Howard's in for a rough season, even more so than last year. Harvick was carrying them so much, and now it's a very weak lineup at Stewart House Racing. I don't see any making the playoffs. And then this one's gonna, I think, get some eyebrows. Ryan Blaney will not make the playoff in NASCAR.
Wow.
Thoughts
Adam.
on that?
I disagree.
I'll defer to Alex on this one. I'm
disagree.
sure he's got something to say about that.
Ryan Blaney, like the greatest version of him, has awoken the last like 5 races of the playoffs. I don't see that going away. And in fact, he could win the Daytona 500. He's been close to winning that several times. All it takes is one win to make the playoffs. So that's very bold, Adam. I do appreciate that. I don't think I agree though, just because Blaney's at the top of his game at the moment. Like he has found something. And all it takes is a win. I know he didn't win a few years ago, and he was the last one to make it without a win. But I don't see that. I think he'll make it pretty easily, actually.
I would hazard a very strong bet that if you're going to take a Penske car not to make the playoffs in 2024, it'll be the 2 car of Austin Cindric, who he would have been on my flops list if we'd got to pick more. But he is another man that really does need to uptick his form into this season, because last year was a struggle.
No, well, but hey, you want to talk about all it takes is one win. The Daytona 500, Austin Cindric did that in 2022, and then he was in the playoffs. Well, we thought he was in the playoffs, and then we kept getting all these new different winners, and we weren't sure. But I'll say this much about Stewart Haas, since I made them one of my flops. I will, and Matthew commented in the chat room, I could see the Fords working together well at a super speedway like Daytona, Talladega. Maybe you throw Atlanta in there with how unpredictable that track can be at this point. But maybe one of the Stewart Haas cars wins a super speedway race, and take your pick, any of the 4 of them. Really, maybe they get one playoff berth among their 4 cars. But I don't think it's going to be, they're certainly not a team that you can count on. Well, if any of our cars fails to get into the playoffs, like a Hendrick Motorsports, for example. I know they had 2 drivers with injuries last year, and I kind of threw them off their game. But if you're driving for Hendrick Motorsports, making the playoffs is not even almost an expectation. It should be a given with where that team is right now. That is certainly not the case in Stewart Haas. I think one car, if any, and probably through a super speedway circumstance or rain shortened fuel mileage, take your pick, something like that.
And can I just say also, in defense of Austin Cindric, I do agree, Matt, he needs to really step it up this year. But a lot of drivers, they tend to really start picking it up around start 100. And I believe he gets close to that toward the end of this year, or maybe it's early next year. So
yeah, probably will be, yeah.
Yeah, so that's when drivers really start getting more and more competitive in the Cup Series. So I think that's going to be something to watch. He really needs to pick it up this year, though, for sure.
And he kind of did that in Xfinity as well, didn't he? It took him a few years, and they were low on Fords in the Xfinity Series. It was like him and Chase Briscoe, wasn't it, in that championship year that he had, or second place in the championship that he had, running up there for Ford. So yeah, that's a good shout actually. I kind of agree with your point.
Sharing that cursed number 60 car for Ralph. That was the horrendous 2018 season. I think a lot of people were ready to just completely write Austin Cindric off after that, but he rebounded in Xfinity. He won a championship in 2020. For being honest, probably should have won a championship again in 2021. Now he's had a couple of years in Cup, got off to the best start possible, winning the 500. But I'm with you, Alex. And I think, just trying to do the math in my head, 36 doubled to 72, 36 races a year. He had some starts in 21. It's going to be around the midway to second, third of this season that he hits that magic number of 100 starts. I do think we need to give our young drivers, particularly when they get to Cup, a little bit more time before we completely write them off as busts who aren't going to do anything with their careers. I certainly don't want to put Cindric in that category just yet. I think he has a lot of potential and a lot of opportunity. But this is one of those years where you have to say, okay, at some point, you need to take that next step. I would think the playoffs would be a reasonable goal for that team whether they can get in through a win or running consistently enough to point their way in. However they do it, that should be top priority from a number 2 team in 2024.
79 starts.
There you go. So just after the halfway point then.